While hosting my wife's family reunion, I overheard her brother in the garage, and then I. It all started on a humid August morning back in 2003. The kind where the sky hangs heavy with that slow summer heat, the air thick with the scent of pine and old dirt roads. I was 38 at the time, running a modest landscaping business in Larch Hollow, a wooded town tucked along the Appalachian Ridges in Pennsylvania. I had a couple guys working under me, good men who knew their way around a rake and a backhoe. That weekend, we'd volunteered for a community trail cleanup project near Rockwood Creek. No pay, just local goodwill and some free sandwiches. That's where I met Callie. She was leading the whole event, clipboard in hand, ponytail up, bossing around volunteers like a woman who knew what she was doing. Turns out she ran a nonprofit focused on environmental restoration. You could tell she took it seriously, carried that conviction like a badge. We ended up working side by side most of the afternoon. She needed help with a badly eroded slope near the main loop trail, and I offered some ideas. Honestly, it was the first time anyone looked impressed when I started talking about proper water drainage, soil retention grids, and native ground covers. She smiled at me like I was brilliant, not just some guy in stained cargo shorts with grass clippings on his boots. We got married 2 years later in the fall of 2005, under a canopy of maples turning red along her uncle's property. We built everything together from scratch, her handling the books, me handling the earth. Our lives weren't flashy, but they were ours. We bought a little 2-story place in Larch Hollow 4 years ago after scrimping and saving, with just enough yard for her to plant wildflowers and me to put in a stone fire it. Then, when my grandfather passed last summer, I inherited his old cabin out by Marble Lake. A rickety place built in the 50s, rotted porch, one working sink, but it had history. We've been fixing it up on the weekends ever since. It felt like a second chance to make something meaningful, something real. So when Callie suggested hosting her family's summer reunion in our backyard this year, I didn't hesitate. We had space, and I figured it'd mean something to her. Her folks were coming in from out east, her mom Helen, her brother Wade, 2 sisters, and what felt like a small army of nieces and nephews. I even took Friday off to help her set up the tents and string lights. She was in high spirits that morning, made me eggs and grits, kissed me twice while I was getting dressed. At the time, I thought she was just excited to see her family. Turns out it was guilt. Or maybe it was just strategy. Around noon, she mentioned we didn't have enough wine to last the weekend. That part was probably true. Her family drinks like they're training for a wine country marathon. I offered to check the backup stash in the garage fridge. There's a door from the kitchen that leads straight out there, and it was half open when I walked up. That's when I heard Wade's voice, sharp and dripping with disgust. He said something like, "Still can't believe you wasted a decade on that broke-ass loser. Remember when he couldn't even afford your ring? Guy's pathetic." I froze. Now, for some context, when I proposed to Callie, I had just 2 steady clients and a truck that rattled when you took it above 40. I saved every spare cent for that ring. It wasn't flashy, but I remember Callie crying when she saw it, said it was perfect. Told me it meant more because I'd worked so hard for it. I held on to that moment for years. I thought it meant something. Then I heard her laugh. Not the nervous kind or the polite kind. This laugh was cold. Mean. The kind of laugh that kicks a man while he's already bleeding out. She told Wade, "Don't worry, it's almost over. My lawyer says with what we're filing, I'll get the whole package. The business, both houses, even the lake cabin, plus alimony for life." My chest locked up. For a second, I thought I might pass out right there in the hallway. It felt like someone dropped a steel beam across my ribs. And then her mother's voice chimed in, sweet as poison. "Good," Helen said. "Drain him dry. Make him pay for wasting your best years." Then Danny, her older sister, added something that made my stomach twist into knots. "Don't forget to move the money before he figures it out," she said. "And change the locks while he's at work." They were laughing. All of them. Laughing about taking everything from me like I was just some outdated appliance they were finally tossing to the curb. I don't know how I did it, but I backed away without making a sound, then walked outside and slammed the shed door like I had just stepped out there casually. I called out, loud enough to echo, heading to grab more wine. Walked into the garage with a smile on my face and a storm behind my eyes. When I came back in, they were talking about the weather like nothing had happened. Wade wouldn't even meet my eyes. I made it through the whole weekend without showing a crack. I grilled hot dogs, played cornhole with her nephews, even raised a glass and gave a toast about family and sticking together through the years. All while my stomach churned with every word. I kept hoping I misheard something, that maybe I twisted it all up in my head. But then I started noticing the small things. How Wade kept making jokes about how the business finally made enough to keep Callie happy. How Helen asked oddly specific questions about whether the cabin was officially in both our names. How Callie kept stepping outside to take phone calls, whispering on the porch like a teenager caught doing something she shouldn't. The worst moment came on Sunday night. Everyone had left. The backyard looked like a battlefield of half-empty wine bottles and tipped-over chairs. I walked upstairs and found Callie in our home office. She jumped like she'd been caught. Said she was just looking for our insurance papers. At midnight, in a locked cabinet. I told her they were in the bottom drawer, smiled, and walked away. Didn't ask questions. Just nodded like I believed her. She gave me this strange look, half suspicion, half pity, then turned back to rifling through the files. I laid in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while she sat in the bathroom with the door shut, texting for hours. That was the night I stopped being a husband. That was the night I started becoming something else. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I felt like I hadn't slept in years. My body was on autopilot, showering, shaving, buttering toast I didn't eat, waving goodbye to a woman I barely recognized anymore. I watched her car disappear down the road before I finally reached for my phone. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call a lawyer. I called my dad. Garrett isn't a man who talks much, but when he does, you listen. He spent 30 years in the Army, retired as a master sergeant, and now spends his days carving furniture in the garage like he's still shaping the battlefield. I told him everything, every word I overheard. The look on Callie's face when she saw me standing in that office doorway, the late-night texts, the hollow sweetness in her voice. He didn't interrupt once. When I finally stopped rambling, there was a long pause before he spoke. "You call a lawyer today," he said. "You do not tip her off. You do not change your routine. You document everything. And tonight, I'll help you lock down the house." That was all he needed to say. I told Callie I had an emergency client meeting and wouldn't be home until late. She didn't ask questions, just smiled, and said she might stay over at her sister's if it got late. That was the first time I knew for sure she had no idea I was onto her. She thought I was still the same dumb husband who handed over the business books every quarter and kissed her hand when she paid the bills. That afternoon, I walked into a lawyer's office on Sycamore Avenue, the kind of building that smells like old paper and controlled aggression. I called ahead, told them I needed someone discreet and fast. They set me up with a woman named Eliza, maybe in her early 40s, sharp-eyed with a voice that never rose above a calm whisper. She listened while I told her everything. 10 years of marriage, joint business, joint accounts, the cabin, the sudden change in Callie's demeanor. And then I told her what I heard in the garage. When I finished, Eliza leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen on the folder. "She's already laid the groundwork," she said. "You're not being paranoid. You're late." That hit harder than I expected. She flipped open a file on her desk and showed me a list of local divorce attorneys. 3 of them had notes next to their names, consulted by opposing party. Callie had beaten me to the legal draw. She'd already visited the 3 best lawyers in town. Even if she didn't hire them, the consultations created a conflict of interest that made them ineligible to take my side. "She was cutting off your options before you even knew you needed them," Eliza said. "That's not a spur-of-the-moment decision. That's planning." I remember just staring at the folder while my fingers curled around the arms of the chair. All I could think was how many nights she'd kissed me after researching how to gut my life. Eliza laid out my next steps. Step 1. Change passwords to every personal account. Step 2. Set up new accounts in my name only, but don't move everything. Just enough to protect myself. Step 3. Document, document, document. Every email, every strange question, every whisper outside. Step 4. Never let her see me angry. Never let her know I knew. When I got back home that night, Dad was waiting in his truck down the street. We didn't speak much. He followed me inside, helped me collect important documents, birth certificate, deed copies, business contracts, even the antique watch my grandfather left me. We didn't remove anything from the house. Eliza had warned against it. Instead, we locked everything in the hidden safe behind the furnace in the basement. Callie never liked going down there. Said the place gave her the creeps. That whole week, I played the part. I smiled over dinner and asked about her day. I let her kiss me goodbye and acted like everything was fine. But every night, I was reading state laws about asset division and spousal fraud. I studied our bank statements line by line, looking for odd withdrawals. I learned more about one-party consent recordings than I ever thought I would. I bought a tiny voice recorder online and wired it behind a fake air vent in my office, just above the filing cabinet she'd been snooping in. By Thursday morning, I caught a break. While she was showering, her phone buzzed with texts from her sister. I already knew her passcode. Her birthday, June 17th, 67. I opened the thread, and there it was in black and white. "Next week is the target. He doesn't suspect anything. I'll handle the locks. Just get the lawyer ready. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. On Friday, I met with Eliza again. She brought in a second attorney, a business specialist named Derek. He wore cufflinks and had the kind of voice that made you sit straighter in your chair. We went over the structure of my company, the ownership split Callie had insisted on when we got incorporated back in 2010. At the time, we'd agreed to a 70-30 split. Me doing the labor, her doing the books. But the filing paperwork she submitted listed her as a 50% owner. I'd signed what I thought were routine forms back then, trusting her like a fool. Derek wasn't discouraged. He combed through the documents like a surgeon, pointing out contradictions, inconsistencies, and most importantly, leverage. If she's falsified ownership, he said, we can dispute her claim entirely. But we have to be ready before she files. If she gets there first, she controls the narrative. That night, I sat on the back porch alone, watching the fireflies blink across the yard like Morse code. Callie was inside, talking on the phone again, pacing up and down the hallway. Her voice drifted through the screen door. Low, clipped, urgent. I closed my eyes and thought about the years I spent building everything from the dirt up. I thought about the way her eyes used to light up when we finished a landscaping job and got the check. I thought about that night in the truck when she said she'd never want anything from me but my time. And now, I was just an obstacle on her path to financial independence. Saturday afternoon, I dropped by the cabin to clear my head. I told her I was checking on the new gutters. Really, I was meeting with a guy named Clark, Eliza's contact, a private investigator who specializes in financial forensics. I handed him 2 flash drives, one with our bank records, the other with the audio from the house recorder. He didn't smile. He just said, I'll be in touch within the week. When I came back home, Callie was making soup. She greeted me with a smile like nothing had happened. I kissed her on the cheek and told her the gutters looked solid. And in that moment, I realized something that scared the hell out of me. I was no longer living with my wife. I was living with someone who thought I was prey. And she had no idea I'd already started sharpening my teeth. The following week started with Callie suggesting dinner with her family to talk things through. I knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a move on her timeline, an opening to start applying pressure. Her family didn't do anything without an agenda, and they certainly weren't looking to sit down and hold hands. I told her it sounded like a good idea, that we should include both sides. Her smile faltered just a second before she agreed. When I told my parents, Dad didn't ask twice. He just nodded and said, I'll drive. Mom said she'd bring the folder I gave her to hold. Copies of the financial records and screenshots, the ones I'd been building up for 2 weeks. We booked a table at a little steakhouse downtown. Not too formal, but not casual either. Callie's mom always liked to be seen someplace with tablecloths. The tension hit as soon as we sat down. Wade was there, smug as ever, and Callie's mother was dressed like she was attending a gala, not a family dinner. Danny sat quiet, barely looking at me, which was fine. I already had enough of her words printed out in ink. For the first 10 minutes, everyone pretended to play nice. Small talk, awkward laughs, forced compliments about the backyard. Then Wade leaned forward, knife tapping on his water glass, and said, some marriages just aren't meant to last, you know. But I guess it's good you guys tried. I didn't look at him. I just focused on cutting my steak while he kept going. At least now, Callie can focus on finding someone who matches her ambition. Someone who isn't so comfortable being small. My dad's knuckles turned white on his fork. My mom was already reaching into her purse, fingers on that folder, but I shook my head slightly. Not yet. I put my utensils down slowly, folded my napkin, and finally looked Wade in the eye. Is that how you think this works? I asked. You think the best way to move forward is to steal someone's company, their inheritance, and call it ambition? Silence dropped over that table like a falling curtain. Wade tried to recover, stammered something about twisting words, but my mom had already placed the folder on the table. She looked straight at Callie and asked, you think it's appropriate to drain accounts without a conversation? Or to file paperwork behind someone's back? Callie went pale. She glanced toward her mother, who stepped in like she was rescuing a drowning child. Women have to protect themselves, Helen said sharply. These situations can become very dangerous. We're just taking precautions. That's when my dad slammed his palm on the table, rattling the silverware. Precautions don't include conspiring with your entire family to rob someone of 10 years of work. The entire restaurant turned to look. Nobody said a word for several long seconds. Helen stood up suddenly, shouting about how I was never good enough for her daughter. Wade was red in the face. Danny finally spoke, telling everyone to calm down, but it was too late. The manager walked over, asked us to leave, and we all filed out like actors after the final curtain call of a bad play. Outside in the parking lot, Wade got in my face again, this time with his finger jabbing at my chest. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed. "You think you're going to walk away from this with anything? You're going to be left with dirt and debt." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My dad stepped between us. Didn't raise a hand. Didn't say a thing. Just stared him down. And for the first time in his life, Wade backed off. Callie refused to ride home with me that night. She left with her parents, head held high like the show hadn't just fallen apart. When she came home later, she stomped through the house, yanking open drawers, throwing clothes in a bag, slamming doors like it proved something. I sat at the kitchen table and watched in silence. Finally, she stopped in the hallway and looked at me like I was a stranger trespassing in her house. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice was flat, empty. I tilted my head and asked what she meant. "Known about what?" I said. She stared at me for a long second, then scoffed and walked out. The next morning, I met with Derek, the business attorney. We reviewed the company's ownership records line by line. He pointed out the contradictions again, explained how her name being listed differently on various forms could allow us to challenge her claim of equal ownership. We weren't just defending the company anymore. We were preparing to protect everything I'd built from being sold off like yard tools in a garage sale. That same evening, while cleaning out the office, I found a voice recorder tucked inside a decorative plant on the windowsill. It was small, barely bigger than my thumb, wedged beneath a plastic fern leaf. I took a picture, checked the law one more time, and left it right where it was. In our state, recording someone without their knowledge is illegal if both parties aren't aware. More evidence. In the same drawer, I found a notebook. It was full of entries. Each one had a date, followed by a story. He yelled at me for checking his email. He made me feel like I couldn't spend money without permission. He questions me every time I see my friends. Page after page, building a version of our marriage that never existed. Most of the dates matched nights I had been out working late, or weekends I was at the cabin laying flooring with Dad. It was fiction, a carefully crafted narrative designed to paint me as a controlling husband. But the most disturbing part was how far back the entries went, almost 7 months. Long before I noticed the late-night phone calls. Long before the reunion. She'd been preparing to burn the house down piece by piece, and I'd just been stacking the firewood for her. That weekend, I drove an hour east to visit my grandfather's sister, Nora. She was in her 80s, sharp as a nail, and still lived in the same old clapboard house where she'd raised 5 kids. She hugged me tight and said she'd been expecting me. Over tea, I asked if Callie had visited her recently. Nora didn't blink. She said Callie came by in May, said she needed information for insurance records, something about verifying the cabin's value and the terms of the will. She said it was for updating your policy, Nora told me. But something in her tone felt wrong. Too practiced. I thanked her, promised to visit again soon, and drove back in silence. It was just confirmation of what I already suspected. Callie hadn't just wanted to take what I had. She'd been planning to erase me from the very things that tied me to my family's past. By Sunday night, I had moved every important item, photos, legal records, heirlooms, to my parents' house. Callie noticed a few things missing and asked if I'd reorganized the closet. I told her I'd just done some spring cleaning. She seemed satisfied with that. The next morning, she left early, said she had errands to run. I sat in the living room, staring out the window for a long time before getting up and locking the front door behind her. Then I changed every password, double-checked the safe, and called Eliza to schedule our next move. We were almost ready. Just one more week. Then the curtain would fall on her performance, on the lies, on the scheme that had been crumbling under its own weight. She still thought I was sleepwalking through the nightmare. But I had already started writing the ending. 3 days after that last dinner disaster, I filed for divorce at 9 a.m. sharp. Eliza handed over the paperwork, neatly clipped together in a leather folder, and told me to breathe. Derek filed the counterclaim immediately, alleging marital fraud, financial deception, and strategic misrepresentation of business interests. That same morning, we submitted a motion to freeze all joint assets and petitioned for full temporary control of the business and both properties. While I was in that courthouse handing over 10 years of my life in paper form, Callie was at home rearranging throw pillows and lighting candles like she still lived in a romantic comedy. The papers were served to her by mid-afternoon, dropped in her hands by a deputy sheriff while she was walking out of a coffee shop downtown. Eliza made sure it was done publicly. Callie hated being embarrassed. Within 20 minutes, my phone buzzed with her name lighting up the screen. I let it ring. Then came the texts, first shock, then confusion, then full-blown rage. "What did you do?" was the first message. "I can't believe you're acting like this," was the next. By dinner time, she'd called 26 times. I didn't answer a single one. The following morning, the emergency hearing was set. Callie showed up to court with a new attorney, a man who looked like he'd gotten the case file just hours earlier. He kept flipping through notes, glancing over at her, whispering nervously while Eliza remained calm, focused, and quietly confident. When the judge asked about the financial transfers from our joint accounts, Callie claimed they were for household expenses and personal needs. When asked for receipts, she had none. Then Eliza played the audio recording from the reunion, the moment where Callie, Wade, and Helen openly laughed about the plan to drain me dry and take everything I owned. The room went silent as the judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. When the words, "He'll never see it coming," came out of Helen's mouth, I watched the judge's jaw clench visibly. Callie's lawyer objected, claiming the recording was obtained illegally, but Eliza calmly cited the one-party consent law and confirmed the recording had taken place inside my home. The judge nodded, then ordered all assets frozen immediately, pending full discovery. He granted me temporary control of the business and our properties and instructed Callie to prepare a full accounting of every dollar she had moved or spent from our shared funds. Outside the courthouse, Callie tried to approach me. She had tears in her eyes, but it didn't reach her voice. "We don't have to do this," she said. "We can figure something out." I looked at her and said nothing. Then I got in my truck and drove away. That night, Howard, my accountant and friend since middle school, called me. He said Callie had just reached out to him, demanding copies of business records and access to client contracts. He told her, politely but firmly, that everything went through me. She snapped, accused him of taking sides, and hung up on him. Howard was furious. He said if she tried again, he'd forward every message straight to Eliza. The next bombshell came from Clark, the PI. He had uncovered documents showing that Callie's family had taken out personal loans, over $40,000, anticipating they'd pay them back after gutting the business and liquidating the cabin. Wade had taken out a second mortgage on his condo in Ridgeview. Helen and her husband had pulled money from their retirement accounts, betting it all on a payday that was now slipping through their fingers. Even worse, Clark found emails from 5 years ago. One of them was from Helen, advising Callie to ride it out a little longer, until the business was profitable. "Stick with him until the payoff is worth the paperwork," it said. They were treating me like a slow-burning investment, something to be harvested when the yield was high enough. The next day, Callie showed up at my parents' house unannounced. My mom answered the door. Callie looked shaken, eyes red, clothes disheveled. "I need to talk to him," she said. I stepped outside, arms crossed. She launched into an emotional monologue about pressure, about how her family had pushed her into all of it. She said she never wanted to destroy me, that things just got out of control. That maybe we could go to therapy. I waited for her to finish, then asked just one question. "Did you ever plan to tell me the truth?" She stared at the ground. "If I hadn't heard you that day," I said, "would you have told me? Or would you have let me lose everything while smiling at me across the breakfast table?" She still didn't answer. I told her we were done talking and walked back inside. 3 days later, we were back in court. The judge reviewed the updated financial findings, including the discovery of secret accounts and unauthorized transfers. Eliza presented the forensic report from Howard and Clark, showing a pattern of deliberate concealment. The judge's voice grew sharper with each passing minute. When he learned that Callie's family had borrowed against assets they didn't own yet, he referred the entire case to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges. As we walked out of court, Eliza leaned over and whispered, "That went about as well as it could have." Outside the building, Wade was waiting for me. He was pacing, red-faced, jaw tight. He stomped up, shoved a finger in my chest, and said, "You think you've won? You're gonna wish you'd played this different." My dad stepped between us before I could respond. Wade shoved him. "Bad move." My dad, calm as ever, planted one solid punch that sent Wade stumbling into a trash can. The man may be 67, but years of construction and military service don't just disappear. Later that week, Eliza received a letter from Callie's new attorney, the third one she'd hired since the case began. They wanted to negotiate a settlement. Their original offer? She keeps the house, gets half the business, and receives monthly spousal support. Eliza laughed so hard I thought she was choking. Our counteroffer was simple. I keep the business, the cabin, and my personal accounts. Callie keeps her car, her clothes, and whatever's left in the account she'd been quietly draining. We included a non-disparagement clause. If any member of her family or social circle tried to damage my name publicly or professionally, the financial penalties would be immediate and severe. They tried to push back until Clark forwarded screenshots from one of Danny's group chats. where she talked about spreading rumors about me once the divorce was finalized. The following morning, I moved back into the house legally. I had the locks changed under court approval and installed security cameras. When I pulled into the driveway, Callie's family was waiting again. Helen, Wade, Danny, even a couple of cousins I barely recognized. They tried to block my path. I stayed in the truck and called the police. While I waited, Wade came stomping up to the window again, yelling through the glass about how I was ruining everything. The officers showed up, dispersed them without incident, and reminded Helen that another outburst would result in a restraining order. She sobbed the whole way down the street like she'd just lost a lottery ticket. That night, I sat alone in my house. The silence felt heavier than usual, but it wasn't empty. It was clean. It was mine. I sat on the porch for a while, sipping whiskey and staring up at the trees swaying against the wind. 10 years of lies had collapsed in just under 3 weeks. I wasn't sure if that was a win or just survival. But either way, the storm had passed. Or so I thought. 2 weeks after Callie's family got chased off my driveway, I was back at the cabin. It was a cool morning, fog still curling off the lake like the place was exhaling. The silence out there wasn't just peaceful, it was pure. I brought coffee in a thermos, one of those heavy steel ones that stays hot all day. I'd planned to patch the railing, maybe sand down some floorboards, but instead I found myself just walking the perimeter. Hands in my pockets, mind spinning in slow, measured loops. The court had granted everything we asked for in the settlement. The business was mine, free and clear. The cabin was off limits to her entirely. She got the house, but under the condition that she refinanced in her name within 6 months. No alimony, no spousal support, just her car, her clothes, and the last 28 grand she'd managed to squirrel away. We also got them to sign a non-disparagement agreement with financial penalties baked in. One slip-up, one public post, and they'd pay for it in cold, hard dollars. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without the taste of smoke. Then something strange happened. I was in the bedroom closet at the cabin, moving some old crates, when a thin envelope slipped from behind the wall paneling. It was wedged between a beam and the insulation, yellowed at the edges and sealed with my grandfather's handwriting across the front. My hands froze the second I saw it. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page codicil, an amendment to his will dated 2 years before he passed. In it, he stated clearly that the cabin and the surrounding land were part of a protected family trust, not just an inheritance. It could only be passed to a direct blood relative and could never be sold, claimed, or divided by a spouse or in-law. It wasn't just a sentimental note. It was notarized, legally binding, and airtight. I called Eliza that afternoon. She didn't laugh, but her voice took on that quiet excitement she saved for courtroom victories. This, she said, this is the nail in their coffin. She submitted it to the judge immediately. A few days later, Callie's attorney filed a panicked motion to dispute the filing. The judge rejected it outright. With that single page of paper, any claim to the cabin's appreciation was erased. They built a strategy around liquidating what they thought was a shared asset, only to find out they'd never had a right to it in the first place. Word must have spread through her family fast, because by the end of the week, Wade had listed his condo. He was behind on payments, and the bank was moving to repossess. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Helen and her husband were trying to restructure their retirement accounts. Apparently, the penalties for early withdrawal were larger than they expected. But just when I thought we'd reached the end, something unexpected happened. Callie vanished. She missed a scheduled court review for the property refinance. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts were scrubbed clean. Even her sister Danny said she hadn't heard from her in over a week. I didn't care much at first. I figured she'd gone into hiding out of shame or maybe just to regroup. But then I got a call from Clark, the PI. She left the state, he said. Used a prepaid card to book a one-way ticket to Denver. According to Clark, she'd applied for a new job under a different last name and was renting a room in someone else's condo. No trace of the old Callie anywhere. Let her go, Eliza told me. She's running from the wreckage. Let her learn what starting over really means. I agreed. I stopped tracking her movements, deleted the updates, and told Clark to close the file. I focused instead on rebuilding what I had nearly lost. The business was thriving. Turns out when you're not constantly looking over your shoulder or hiding from your own wife, you get a lot more done. I hired a new office manager named Leah who came highly recommended and turned out to be 10 times more efficient than Callie ever was. She actually listened, organized things without drama, and never once asked if she could borrow 20 grand behind my back. One day while sorting some things in the cabin attic, I found my grandfather's old field radio. Still intact, still wired. I set it on the workbench, cleaned it up, and decided then and there what I wanted to do next. Not just with the cabin, but with my life. I drafted a proposal for a youth program, something for kids who didn't have much, who didn't come from privilege. Outdoor skills, conservation work, maybe some hands-on training in basic trades like carpentry and landscaping. I called it Echo Camp, a place where kids could leave the noise of the world behind and just be still, just like I was learning to do. The project gave me something real again, something mine, and that meant more than any house or bank account ever could. But just when I thought the chaos had finally settled, a message popped up from an unfamiliar number. It was a screenshot of a Reddit thread. There she was, Callie, posting under a throwaway account. I just want to tell my side, the post began. She painted herself as a victim, said her husband had manipulated her, that her family only wanted what was fair. She left out the part about the recordings, the accounts, the hidden notebook, the forged ownership forms. She made herself sound like someone who got blindsided, not someone who'd been quietly planning an ambush for nearly a year. The comments section wasn't buying it. People picked her apart line by line. One person posted a copy of the court order, which was public record, showing the fraud investigation. Another pointed out how conveniently absent her explanation was about the money transfers. But the best part? She launched a crowdfunding campaign. "Help me heal," she wrote in the description. "Trying to rebuild after trauma. Every dollar helps." Her goal was $30,000. Last I checked, she had 47. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The truth had already done what I couldn't. Weeks passed. The leaves started changing. My parents came up to the cabin one weekend, helped me build out the fire ring, and stayed the night in the guest room for the first time. Dad sat on the porch with a cigar, staring out at the water like he'd never seen anything so still. Mom made pancakes in the morning, humming the old Patsy Cline tune she always sang when I was little. For once, there was no tension, no edge in the air, just peace. Then, late one evening, I got a text from Wade. No threats this time. No insults. Just 6 words. "I hope you're happy now." I stared at the message for a full minute before setting the phone down on the windowsill. Outside, a wind was moving through the trees, rustling the pine needles like a whispered warning. I thought about all the ways I could respond, all the things I could say, but none of it mattered anymore. Let them stew in what they built. Let them rot in the ruin they tried to hand to me. I'd survived. No, more than that. I had reclaimed everything they tried to bury. Sometimes the people who say they love you are the ones holding the shovel. And sometimes, the only way to win is to let them dig their own grave. I poured a drink, walked outside to the fire pit, and watched the sparks drift upward like stars fleeing the earth. In my hand was a page from Callie's fake journal, the one where she claimed I locked her out of the bank account and screamed when she asked for help. I held it over the flame and let it burn, the words curling into black ash before disappearing entirely. Not revenge, not rage, just closure.